This Lake Blossoms fabric from the Cave Collective is already gorgeous. But check out what a bit of thread painting on a home sewing machine can do. This technique can actually be easier than most free motion quilting designs because we won't be inventing designs or creating patterns from scratch. We'll be enhancing the fabric by outlining and filling in shapes that are already there. Use any fabric you like that has a distinct shape or portion of the design that you want to feature. Here are a few examples that I'm looking forward to playing with in the future. And if those aren't your cup of tea, no worries. Fabric like these could work too. You'll be happiest if you choose a fabric that you really love. Hi, I'm Beth Ann, and today I'm going to share what I think is the easiest way to get started with thread painting, embellishing a commercial fabric. If you've watched any of my free motion quilting videos, some of the things we'll talk about today will feel familiar, but there will be important differences too. Let's start with how we can set ourselves up for success by stabilizing our fabric. This step is super important because without that extra support, the fabric can start to ripple and pucker like this or like this. Can you see how the heavy stitching is creating hills and valleys? There's no way that finished fabric will lie nice and flat. If you're just starting out, try stabilizing your fabric with products you already have. As you gain more experience, you'll find that some things work better than others. The stabilizers I find particularly helpful for the techniques we're exploring today are a soft woven interfacing such as Shape Flex by Pellon, which is thin but sturdy and fusible on one side, or Decor Bond, which is a medium weight interfacing that is noticeably thicker and stiffer, but still soft enough to crumple, and again, fusible on one side. A plastic or bamboo embroidery hoop made for hand embroidery can also be very helpful for preventing distortion. Here's a bunch of different sizes. When choosing the hoop size, consider the size of the design and how much room there is between the needle and the side of your sewing machine. When you use a hoop, it's important to pull the fabric taut without stretching it out of shape and tighten the hoop to keep the fabric from slipping. This particular hoop can be tightened by turning the screw. I also want you to notice that unlike for hand embroidery, where we would have the fabric at the top of the hoop, for thread painting on a sewing machine, we need the fabric on the bottom of the hoop, flush with the bed of the sewing machine. Here I've flipped the hoop over so that you can see my progress and see that the fabric is still nice and taut on the bottom of the hoop. This size hoop worked well for this design as I had plenty of room to move around. But if you're working on a larger design or have a smaller sewing machine, you may need to do as much of the thread painting as you can and then unhoop and rehoop the fabric in a different spot and then finish thread painting the design. Now let's talk thread. Once again, you can start with what you may already have. This is a simplification, but with thread, the larger the weight number, the finer the thread. Fine thread like this 100 weight light blue can be difficult to see, while a thicker thread like this 40 weight variegated spool will show up nicely. So for top thread, we're looking for either all-purpose weight, which is 50 weight, or something a little heavier or thicker. Cotton or cottonized threads will give you more of a matte finish or perhaps a subtle sheen, while some polyester threads will give you more of a shiny finish. I suggest starting with no more than 3 to 4 thread colors or values that will complement your fabric. Here are the 3 threads I picked for this project, and you can see that I went for shiny. A quick tip: if you like to use cone threads in a domestic or home sewing machine, a thread stand can come in very handy. To use it, just position the thread stand on the right-hand side of your machine, place the thread on the spindle, and run the thread through the hook at the top of the stand, and then thread your machine just like normal. Moving on, should the bobbin thread always match the top thread in type and size? It can, but it doesn't always have to. I'm a big fan of pre-wound bobbins with 50, 60, or 80 weight thread. Your particular machine may show a preference as to cotton or poly in the bobbin, so if you're having trouble with one type, consider switching to the other. You can change bobbin threads with each new top thread, but you don't necessarily have to keep on changing. For this design, I used the same lightweight bobbin thread with all of my top thread colors. Not only can using a finer thread in the bobbin help with thread tension, but there's less thread buildup on the back of the fabric. Now that we have our fabric and thread picked out, let's set up our sewing machines. If you already do a lot of free motion quilting, this will feel very familiar. You don't need a super expensive, fancy machine to do this, but some features are fundamental. First, you'll need a machine that has been cleaned of any linty buildup around the needle path and around the bobbin area. It's surprising how fast lint can accumulate. I try to clean my machine out and change the needle with every 2 to 3 bobbin refills, or at least at the end of every project. It really makes a difference. Second, a free motion or spring embroidery foot, and I'll show you what that might look like. There are many different variations of the basic darning foot, or it might be called free motion foot, spring embroidery foot, or hopping foot. These are just some of the most common. Generally, all will work. However, I prefer a free motion foot with an open toe shaped like the letter C, which will clearly let you see all the way to the needle, as I feel it offers the best visibility. Next, you'll need the ability to drop the feed dogs in your machine so that you can move the fabric freely. Check your manual. If your machine has a special setting for free motion quilting or free motion embroidery, try it. This often automatically drops the feed dogs. This is a close-up of the feed dogs in my machine. If your machine does not automatically lower the feed dogs in your machine when you select a free motion stitch, you'll need to do it manually. This step is important as it will prevent the machine from fighting you as you move the fabric manually to stitch in the direction that you choose. You'll also need a zigzag throat plate so you don't keep breaking needles. Fortunately, this comes standard on most machines. You're looking for a wide opening where the needle will go into the fabric, not a small circle. Finally, a new sewing machine needle so that your needle slides into the fabric rather than having to punch its way in. My personal favorite option for thread painting is a top stitch needle size 80-12 because it has a strong reinforced shaft so it doesn't easily break, a sharp point so it pierces the layers of fabric and interfacing cleanly, and a longer eye so there'll be less friction on the thread, making it less likely to fray or break as you're working. Now let's quickly go over stitch settings. Quick reminder, check your manual to see if your machine has a specific setting for free motion quilting or free motion embroidery. If it does, try it. Set the machine to stop with the needle down if you have that option. And for all these settings, please remember that your machine may look different than this one, but the function should be similar. Drop your feed dogs if they haven't dropped already. Engage your auto backstitch or locking stitch if you have a good one that doesn't make a thread volcano. And check your thread tension by stitching on a bit of scrap fabric and stabilizer. In theory, it shouldn't matter what your stitch length setting is when you're free motion thread painting. However, some machines seem to prefer it if you set the stitch length down to nearly 0, although I can leave mine on the default setting of 2.0 just fine. With free motion work, stitch direction, length, and width, if applicable, are completely controlled by how fast you run your machine and how you move the fabric with your hands. Moving the fabric quickly or running the machine slowly leads to longer stitches, while moving the fabric slowly or running the machine quickly leads to shorter stitches. So we're looking for balance. The good news is, since we're stitching on top of a design that is already there, thread painting can be pretty forgiving. So far, we've been talking about a straight stitch setting. Let's switch gears. When thread painting with a zigzag stitch, The stitch width can be adjusted to give a narrower or wider swing of the needle. The stitch length and direction will still be determined by your hand movement, just as it would be with a straight stitch. So, which stitch setting should you use? Straight or zigzag? Either works, but let's look at what difference this choice might make. A free motion straight stitch setting can be especially helpful when you want to use a thin line of stitching to outline a motif or indicate fine shading, create smooth curves, or navigate around fine details in a design, or vary the stitch length, width, and direction in a controlled way. On the other hand, a free motion zigzag setting can be helpful when you want to use thicker, bolder lines of stitching to outline a motif or indicate shading, add bold texture, fill in an area quickly, or blend colors in larger areas or in layers. Let me show you what I mean about filling an area and blending colors with a free motion zigzag. First, I'm going to bring up the bobbin thread. There we go. Guide it under my presser foot. Hold tight to both threads and lock my stitches with little tiny stitches. There we are. Then I'm going to establish a baseline since I don't have a printed design to follow right now. I'll go across a few times and then I'll start building upwards. There we go. As you can see, the needle is going back and forth, but the overall movement is controlled by my hands. I want to create shading, so I'm varying the height of my stitching lines. Let's skip ahead now to see that I finished my base layer and have added a second layer on top of the first to create a shift in color. This shift would be even more visible on a printed fabric where the colors of the fabric are shifting too. Always remember, there's no right or wrong here. Feel free to experiment to see what gives you your best results. I often use both styles of stitching in the same piece. Let's see this in action. But first, another quick reminder, always lock your stitches at the beginning and end of each line of stitching so that the threads don't slide out of the fabric. This can be a locking stitch, or it can be a short line of teeny stitches, or tiny stitches combined with a manual back stitch. Now let's get back to my sample. It may vary with the fabric you choose, but I like to start with one color at a time, often a medium value. In this case, I started with the burnt orange thread. In the photo, I'm coming in with my lightest thread to create highlights. This is all with a straight stitch. Can you see where I'm stitching now? I'm using my very lightest thread to outline and highlight some of the color changes in the fabric. This will help the other colors, in this case the burnt orange and the purple, to pop visually. Now I've switched colors to my darkest value, purple. I'm using it to define and separate the darker purple values in the fabric and to outline the individual petals. This will help create dimension. I'm happy with how it's coming along, except for the too light area on the underside of this petal. Fortunately, it's an easy fix. I went back in with my purple thread and broke up that stark white area. Finished. I like it much better now. Notice that I didn't cover the whole fabric, I just embellished it. Let's do a quick recap. Choose your design, in this case, the portion of the fabric that you want to embellish or enhance. Stabilize your fabric. I used interfacing and an embroidery hoop. Select your threads. I recommend starting with 3 or 4 colors of cotton or poly sewing or quilting thread. Set up your machine with a free motion foot, dropped feed dogs, zigzag throat plate, and a new needle. And start stitching with a free motion straight stitch or a free motion zigzag stitch. If you're one of my Quilting Friends channel members, be sure to download the new printable resource that goes with this video. But whether you're a channel member or not, I hope you'll have as much fun with this technique as I do. And please let me know in the comments if you'd like a deeper dive into all the wonderful things you can do with thread painting and quilting. Meanwhile, happy stitching!